Welcome to Sleepy Lore. Tonight we spend time with Marcus Aurelius, Roman emperor, Stoic philosopher, and a man who spent his life trying to be good in a world that made that very difficult. This is not a story of battles or conquest. It is quieter than that. It is a story of a man talking to himself in the dark, trying to remember what matters. Allow yourself to settle in, breathe slowly, and let the words carry you. He was born in the year 121 in the city of Rome, into a family of some wealth and standing, but no particular distinction. His father died when he was young enough that Marcus would later say he remembered almost nothing about him, only a vague impression of gentleness and of a man who did not raise his voice. His mother raised him. He loved her deeply and without complication, which is rarer than it sounds. By the time he was a boy, it was clear that he was serious in a way that most boys are not serious. He was interested in ideas. He liked to think. He liked to sit with a question the way you sit with a fire, not trying to solve it immediately, not trying to make it go away, just staying close to it, watching it, seeing what it did. At 12, he began to study philosophy. This was not unusual for a Roman boy of his class. Philosophy was considered part of a proper education, the way you might study rhetoric or law. But for most boys, it was something you learned and then set aside, the way you set aside a book when you finished with it. For Marcus, it was different. He took it personally. He took it home. He slept on the floor for a while as a young man, in the style of the Stoic philosophers, to practice simplicity. His mother had to convince him to sleep on a bed with a light mattress instead, for the sake of his health. He conceded, not because he stopped believing in simplicity, but because he understood that breaking his body was not the same as strengthening his mind. He was still a young man when the Emperor Hadrian noticed him. Hadrian was childless and aging and in need of a successor, and he was also, in his own complicated way, a lover of intelligence. He arranged for Marcus to be adopted, not immediately, but through a chain of adoption that would eventually place Marcus in line for the throne. Marcus did not want it. This is worth pausing on. Most people who have ever lived have wanted power, the desire to control things, to be important, to have the world arrange itself around your preferences. This is perhaps the most common human desire there is. Marcus understood this. He had read enough philosophy to understand it very clearly, to see how it worked in other men, to trace its shape in the air, and still he did not want it. He wrote about this many times, in different ways, in the private journal he kept throughout his life. The book we now call the Meditations, though he never named it that, and never intended for anyone to read it. It was a book written to himself, for himself. A man reminding himself again and again of things he already knew but kept forgetting. "Do not indulge in dreams of what you have not," he wrote. "Count up and take stock of the resources you do have." Before Marcus Aurelius, there was Epictetus. Epictetus was a philosopher who had lived about a generation earlier, and his life was so different from Marcus's that the two men seem at first to belong to entirely different worlds. Epictetus was born a slave. He had no wealth, no family name, no political standing. He had at some point in his life a master who broke his leg, an act of deliberate cruelty. And Epictetus, according to the stories, warned the man calmly that the leg would break before it did, and then, when it broke, said simply, "I told you so." He was eventually freed. He lived simply in a small house with almost nothing in it. He taught philosophy to anyone who wanted to learn, and the thing he taught over and over in different ways was a single distinction that sounds simple and is not. There are things within your control, he said, and there are things outside your control, within your control, your judgments, your responses to what happens to you, the values you choose to act from, the effort you decide to make. Outside your control, everything else, the weather, other people's behavior. Whether you are rich or poor, healthy or sick, praised or ignored, remembered or forgotten. Most human suffering, Epictetus believed, comes from confusing these two categories, from treating things outside your control as though they were within it, from expecting the world to behave the way you want it to behave, and feeling betrayed when it does not. Marcus read Epictetus carefully. He returned to him throughout his life. The meditations are full of echoes of Epictetus, the same ideas, turned over and approached from different angles, applied to the specific problems of a specific man in a specific situation. The specific situation being running an empire. Marcus became emperor in 161 at the age of 39. He did not celebrate. There is no record of a feast or a procession he arranged for himself. What there is a record of is a letter he wrote to his old philosophy teacher, Marcus Cornelius Fronto, a few days after taking power. The letter is mostly about philosophy. It is the letter of a man who wants to talk about ideas, not about his new position, not about what he has gained. He was emperor for 19 years. They were not easy years. Almost immediately after taking power, the empire was struck by a plague, a terrible, sweeping illness that moved from east to west and killed an enormous number of people. Modern historians estimate it may have killed 5 million. Entire towns emptied. The army was devastated. The economy struggled. While this was happening, the borders of the empire were under pressure from several directions at once. Marcus spent much of his reign not in Rome, not in comfort, but on campaign. In tents, in cold, in the difficult countries along the Danube River, managing wars he had not started and could not simply end. He wrote the meditations during these years. Most of it was written in the field. Try to hold that image for a moment. A man who is also the most powerful person in the known world, sitting alone in his tent after a day of managing an empire at war, writing private notes to himself about how to be a better person. Not advice for others, not a philosophy book for publication, just a man arguing with himself, reminding himself, pushing back against his own laziness and impatience and fear. You have power over your mind, not outside events, he wrote. Realize this, and you will find strength. He wrote about the morning. He wrote about how difficult it is to get out of bed, not in an abstract way, in the specific human way that everyone who has ever had to do something hard in the morning understands. At dawn, he wrote, when you have trouble getting out of bed, tell yourself, I am rising to the work of a human being. Why then am I dissatisfied if I'm going to do the things for which I exist and for which I was brought into the world? He meant it literally. He had to remind himself. The Emperor of Rome, surrounded by every comfort the ancient world could offer, still had mornings where he lay in bed and did not want to get up. The warmth of the blankets, the heaviness of fatigue, the small, persistent voice that says, not yet, just a little longer. He wrote it down. He was not trying to pretend he was above difficulty. He was trying to meet it. And there is something quietly remarkable about that. He could have pretended in his private journal to be better than he was. No one was going to read it. He could have written the version of himself he wanted to be. Calm, consistent, serene. Instead, he wrote the version of himself that actually existed. Someone who struggled to get up in the morning, who found other people exhausting, who had to keep reminding himself of things he already knew. The impediment to action advances action, he wrote. What stands in the way becomes the way. This idea that obstacles are not problems to be eliminated but material to be worked with is one of the things Marcus returns to most often. The difficult situation is also the training ground. The person who frustrates you is also the person who teaches you patience. The morning you do not want to face is also the morning that builds the habit of facing things. You do not get stronger in comfortable conditions. You get stronger in the conditions that are actually in front of you. He wrote about other people. He wrote about how to deal with difficult people. People who were rude or dishonest or ungrateful or simply exhausting in the way that some people are exhausting without quite meaning to be. He wrote about this a great deal, which suggests he found it genuinely difficult. He was not a man who naturally found other people easy. He was introverted and serious and preferred ideas to crowds. But he kept returning to the same conclusion. People behave badly because they do not know better, or because they are suffering in ways that are not always visible. To respond to bad behavior with anger is to add to the sum of bad behavior in the world. To respond with patience, or at least with something that is trying to be patience, is harder but more useful. When you wake up in the morning, he wrote, tell yourself, the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly. They are this way because they cannot tell good from evil. But I have seen the beauty of good and the ugliness of evil, and have recognized that the wrongdoer has a nature related to my own, not of the same blood and birth, but the same mind, and possessing a share of the divine. He was not naive. He knew the people around him were sometimes corrupt, sometimes dangerous, sometimes motivated by things he found incomprehensible. He was not writing instructions for how to be foolish. He was writing instructions for how not to let other people's behavior determine the quality of your own inner life. This is a subtle distinction, but an important one. You cannot control how other people act. You can control whether their actions pull you out of the person you are trying to be. You can notice when you are about to respond with cruelty or impatience, and you can pause and you can choose differently. Not always, not perfectly, but more often with practice, more often over time. He wrote about time. He wrote about how brief everything is, not in a way that was supposed to be frightening, but in a way that was supposed to be clarifying. Everything that has ever existed has passed or will pass. Every emperor, every city, every idea that seemed eternal. The Rome that Marcus ruled had itself, in some previous century, seemed impossibly permanent, and yet it had changed and would keep changing, and was already different from what it had been and would someday be gone. How many a Chrysippus, how many a Socrates, how many an Epictetus have time already swallowed up? The things we are so worried about, what people think of us, whether we are successful, whether we are remembered, these things dissolve so quickly on the scale of time that the anxiety about them seems, in his writing, almost tender. The way you might feel tender toward a child who is very upset about something that will not matter by morning. He thought often about Alexander the Great, who had conquered most of the known world before dying at 32. He thought about what had happened to Alexander's glory, his armies, his empire. He thought about the physicians who attended on the great and powerful and died themselves. He thought about the entire generations of the past, people who were just as worried, just as ambitious, just as convinced that their particular concerns were the most important concerns in the world. All of it gone, all of it quiet now. But this was not meant to make him despair. It was meant to make him lighter. If nothing lasts, if the anxiety, the embarrassment, the failure, the grudge that seems so heavy today will be dissolved so quickly, then perhaps there is room to set it down. Perhaps there is room to breathe. Perhaps the moment in front of you, ordinary and specific and real, is more valuable than the abstract future you are always planning for. Confine yourself to the present, he wrote, not because the past is worthless or the future is unimportant, but because the present is the only place where anything actually happens. The past is memory. The future is imagination. This moment right now is the only place where you can actually do anything, think anything, be anything. It is also, when you look at it clearly, he wrote about death. He wrote about it often, and without flinching, which was characteristic of Stoic philosophy. The Stoics believed that thinking about death clearly, not obsessing over it, not being consumed by it, but looking at it honestly, made life easier to live. It removed a certain kind of background fear. It made the present moment more vivid. It is not death that a man should fear, he wrote, but he should fear never beginning to live. He thought about the people who had come before him. Hadrian, who had arranged his adoption and seemed so permanent and then died. Augustus, who had built the empire and become a god in the eyes of the people and then became nothing. Scipio, Pompey, Caesar, all of them so powerful and so certain of their importance and so completely gone. What was left of them? Stories, a few buildings, some words preserved by chance, and even those would go eventually. Think not of what is missing, he wrote, but of what you have. His own death came in 180 in the city of Vindobona, the city we now call Vienna. He was 58 years old, and he had been sick for some time. He knew it was coming. The accounts of his final days are few and imperfect, but they agree on this. He was calm. He had spent decades training himself to face difficulty without panic, and it seems that the training held at the end. He asked about his son. He made sure things were in order. He said goodbye to the people around him with a quietness that they remembered. There is a story, perhaps true, perhaps invented by someone who loved him, that in his last hours, when a guard came to ask what password to give to the sentinels for the night, Marcus looked at him and said, "Go to the rising sun. I am already setting." Whether or not he said it, it sounds like him. It has the quality of something a man might actually say if he had spent his whole life trying to look at hard things clearly and without pretending they were something else. He left behind the Meditations, 12 small books of private notes, not intended for anyone, found after his death and preserved by the people who loved him. They have been read continuously ever since. Translated into dozens of languages, carried by soldiers and by presidents and by ordinary people who found in his private arguments with himself something that helped, something that felt like a hand placed quietly on the shoulder in a difficult moment. What he was trying to do across all those pages was not very complicated. He was trying to pay attention, to do the work in front of him without complaint, to be patient with the people around him, to not be too attached to outcomes he could not control, to remember that time is brief and the present moment is real. He knew he would keep forgetting. He wrote it down anyway. Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be one. That is the whole of it, really. Rest now. You have been listening, and that is enough for tonight. Let the words settle into you the way warmth settles in at the end of a long day, not dramatically, not all at once, but quietly from the edges inward. The day is done. The thinking is done. There's nothing left to solve tonight and nothing that needs to be held onto. You are here. You are breathing. That is enough. Good night.